Would you please pray with me? Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable to you, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Anyone a little damp? A little wet? It is good. Anyone been so wet that they lived through a hurricane? No one. How about like a major flood where you were affected? Anybody? I never have, at least not personally. Though when I was growing up, my mom used to tell stories about the floods that her family would endure as she was growing up. They lived in Schlachta for a while. Schlachta is, I hesitate to even say a village, outside of Indiana, Pennsylvania on 422. It's just a little town that has a stream that goes through it. And she would tell stories about when they would get any sort of significant rainfall, the little stream would flood quite a bit. And she would tell stories about this, and she would say when the floods came, when the rain waters got higher, it was a helpless feeling. There's nothing you could do. If the water was going to consume the shed or the yard or even the house, there wasn't much you could do except watch it. When it got there, it was pretty much going to do the thing that it wanted to do, whether you liked it or not. And though I have not personally lived through the devastating effects of violent water, I have seen them firsthand. When I was in seminary, the church that I was interning at took the youth to New Orleans the year after Katrina went through. Many of you have been to that area since then as well. We took our youth there a few years ago. A number of the adults from our congregation go down every year to do work. But it was particularly powerful to be there that first summer after the hurricane. I still have images in my head that I will never forget. I remember before we left, there would be people talking on the news and other places about how significant the devastation was, how widespread. I remember things being said, something like, well, the damage is so massive, it'll take 20 years to rebuild. And I could not wrap my head around that for the life of me. I could not imagine damage so overwhelming that it would take decades to resurrect until I saw it. It is truly difficult to describe what I saw that first year back in New Orleans. Likely you have all seen pictures or video on TV when that was all happening in years past since then. You have some sense for what it's like when a devastating hurricane or tornado goes through. You know the awesome destruction. But the thing that TV or whatever media, whatever it was, could not communicate to me was the massive scale of the damage. The volume, the miles and miles and miles of devastation. It was just shocking. But while we are there, even in the midst of just miles and miles of devastation and death and loss, what was even more apparent was that God was there in the midst of all of it. In fact, God was there in abundance. Not creating any of that, to be sure, but it was easy to see the workings of God within our group. We were a church group who gave up a week of our lives, some kids, some adults, just to go and help other people. Sort of a no-brainer if you're trying to think of where would God be in the midst of this? That was it, right? But it wasn't just us. Everyone had stories there, those who lived there, about what God was up to in the midst of huge devastation. About people who rose up in the midst of the storm to help one another, people who saved other people. About places or things that survived miraculously in the midst of total devastation around it. A church gone, but yet the altar being the only piece still standing right in the middle. Another church where all that was left was the steeple outside and a staircase up to the balcony. The choir was there. God likes the choir. Yeah, up in the balcony. Yeah, up. You had to be clear, right? Up there, not down here in the front. We heard stories about new opportunities for relationships, new beginnings that were happening out of devastation, new things God was doing through water, the waters of a flood. So Genesis talks about waters, doesn't it? If I asked most of you, I think, and I said, so in Genesis, when it says God creates the heavens and the earth, what was there to begin with? You would say, nothing. I heard Barb, she got it right. Water. What kind of water? Calm, a calm lake? Turbulent waters, chaotic waters. It says there's a formless void and there are waters there, and the Spirit, the wind, the ruach of God blowing hard over it. Like a hurricane, that's what God creates out of. God begins light and darkness. It's not nothing that God creates out of. It's water, windy water, a formless void with water there. And God is the one blowing the water. Perhaps you, like me, feel as if chaos is a word that often describes your world. A house with 3 little ones, periodically running around and all fighting for supremacy, would easily describe our house, chaos, from time to time. Sometimes it's difficult just to have a conversation with Stacy, who's 2 feet from my face. Maybe your chaos does not have anything to do with your family or your kids or your spouse or your parents. Maybe work is the place of your chaos. All of the expectation, all the details, all the communications, all of the ways in which you have to follow the rules and pay attention to details. Maybe working nicely with other people just isn't like your thing, but you have to when you're at work, right? Because if you don't, you're going to be in big trouble. Maybe you just don't want to be near anybody. Maybe you work at a job where you are not near anybody and you really wish you were. Many of the folks in our church community feel like maybe their life is chaos, the chaos of loneliness. Some of us in this community have lost our spouses. Some of us have had children grow up and move out. Some of us know the chaos of losing the ability to do the things we want to do or to live the lifestyles that we want to live or to even feel that our bodies feel the same way they did back in the day. Like a flood whose waters are slowly rising to our front door, it is a helpless feeling for age to wrestle with our bodies. Chaos. And not to mention the sort of chaos that racks ourselves, our families, when things like sicknesses and illnesses happen. The way a life or a family is changed when cancer is introduced, or the prognosis of dementia is announced. So great is chaos in those moments that all else seems to have lost its meaning or perhaps changed forever. Chaos. Anyone feeling some chaos? God. Chaos and God go together. From the very beginning of the Bible, the very first story, the writers identified our God not as the one who's high and far away beyond the clouds or wherever, but the one who is immersed in the darkness, making the waters rage and move and circulate and blow. A God who isn't just familiar with chaos, but a God who comes from the chaos, who brings order from the chaos. Today, we celebrate the gift of baptism. Let's talk about water and chaos in terms of baptism for a moment. In one way, the water that we just immersed little Grace and that you all got to enjoy isn't very chaotic. In fact, you may even say it's the opposite of the chaotic waters of a hurricane. The opposite of the chaotic waters of Genesis. It is exactly the opposite of those waters of a flood or anything like that little Grace was touched with, and you were all touched with this morning. These are waters of order, right? This is the water that God has ordered and is doing something with. These are waters of life in this font. These are waters of renewal, of rebirth, of adoption and welcome into God's family. Today, Art and Andrea gave up baby Grace so that she does not just belong to her family, but to our family. No longer Grace Evelyn and Trary, Grace Evelyn, child of God, brother and sister with all of us. And so just when you thought you were bringing Grace into these calm and ordered waters, of baptism, at the same time, chaos ensues. Because to be brothers and sisters with all of these people, let me tell you, is chaos. Beautiful chaos sometimes. A few of them, not beautiful chaos. To be part of a family means it's not about you anymore. It's not about Grace anymore. It's not about you, Art, or you, Andrea. It's about the family that we are part of. It's about caring for one another. It's about living as if you are part of a family. And you've heard the expectations of this family. They are long and exhaustive. And every time I read them to parents, I always think, good Lord, they're going to say, I do at the end of this. And we do. Because beautifully, the promises don't stop with you or with your sponsors, but they continue on to all these beautiful people that were standing behind you. Today, you join, especially you, Grace, who's completely into what I'm saying, in a brand new way, a family that will never give up on you, but they will mess you up in a good way, all through chaotic waters. I want to finish with an invitation for you all. In an attempt to make sermons not just end when I say amen, but to continue on, an invitation. You'll notice over here on the side wall, we've put a sign up and a banner. Did anybody notice this? Good. I'm glad a few of you paid attention. Or maybe you're just not paying attention to anything else. Hey, there's something on the wall over there. It says, God in the midst of chaos. And I invite you over this next week to think about places you see God in the midst of chaos. Bring in pictures and put them on here. There's there's markers here and Sharpies. Write words. Draw pictures if you're so inclined. Text or email me pictures that you have taken. Who has a phone? Oh, come on, you knuckleheads. You all have phones. So you all have cameras. You all go around in the world. It is not hard to see God's presence in this world, to see God in the midst of a chaotic world. I put a picture here up of, since I preached about Katrina, after Katrina, there's a church here that pretty much the whole church was gone except the apse over the middle of the chancel area. And they put a Celtic cross kind of right in front of it with a really neatly angled picture. So come and take a look at it. And actually, I think I have another picture here that I might have taken that we might have for today. Do you have a picture, Emily? I do. What's on your picture? Oh my goodness, it looks like a baptismal picture. We have a picture of God breaking into the midst of chaos that you were all part of just moments ago. So we're going to hang this up too. It doesn't need to be this spectacular, but you know God in the midst of your world when you see it. And I invite you to record that and share it on the wall this week. I was going to say amen, but then that would mean that it's over. And it's just the beginning. And it is low to the ground for young people to touch it and draw it and look at it also.